Hi, guys. So, in your last activities that you did at the end of last week, you were looking at biomolecules. So, these are the things that we consume in order to get energy. So, the three biological molecules that we consume and use are protein, fats, and carbohydrates. There is a fourth biomolecule that you should have watched a video on, and that would be DNA. We are going to talk about DNA later. So, the three we are going to focus on are proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And the other name for fats is lipids. The two of those molecules that we use for energy are carbs and fats. Carbs and fats are used for energy because they have carbon to carbon bonds. And I like to think of them like a glow stick. When you break a glow stick, it releases light. So when you break a carbon to carbon bond, it releases energy that you use to do stuff. Okay. Protein is used solely for biomass. So that is your living stuff. That is all the stuff in your body. That is protein. The really, I don't know, kind of sad way that I remember this is if you look at pictures from the Holocaust of people in starvation or death camps, when you are so emaciated, so like you are starving like ridiculously, like to the point where you're almost dead, you lose your fat, but your body maintains muscle mass as a last resort. So, first in your body, you are going to use carbohydrates for energy. That is all of the carbs that you eat. So that's why if you've ever heard of carb loading or having like a pasta party, like sometimes soccer teams or cross country teams or football teams will eat pasta the day before a big game or a big match or anything like that. And that is to get carbs in your body because that's what we use first for energy. The second thing we use for energy is those fats, because when we break those bonds in those fats, that gives us long lasting energy. And the last thing that we use for energy, because it's not efficient at all, because it does not have a lot of carbon that you should have seen in your sheet that you did last class, is protein. So that is the last thing that we break down for carbohydrates. That's why you maintain your muscle mass and you get rid of fat first, you maintain your muscles. Okay. So, when we're talking about these different animals that consume things, there are also some structures that help these animals to break down certain things. And that's why in this little note set, I have hide and go cecum. So, there is a thing called a cecum that we're going to talk about. So, this process of breaking down food in your body is called digestion. So, this is how we convert chemical energy, so our food energy, into heat energy. So, that is movement, respiration, all of those different things. In your body, this is done with something called an enzyme. So enzymes are actually made of proteins, and they are like little workers that actually break down everything. So if you eat a big cheeseburger, you have enzymes in your stomach and your whole GI tract that are going to break down that burger into all of the different parts that then your body can use in order to make energy. So the example that I have on the note set is in your body, you have an enzyme, or some people do. I don't have a lot of it. I'm kind of lactose intolerant. But if you have the enzyme lactase, anything that ends in ase is an enzyme. That breaks down the sugar lactose that is in milk that gives you energy. If you are like me and you are lactose intolerant, either wholly or slightly, that means that you don't have that enzyme. So your body can't break down lactose. So it tries to break it down as best as it can. And it makes a lot of gas that either comes up this way or that way. Okay. So that's kind of what's happening with lactose intolerance. In animals, especially herbivores, there is a structure called a cecum, and this is part of the digestive system. So if we think about our digestive system from mouth to butt, you are basically a big tube. So your food goes in your mouth, down your esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and then rectum or poop chute if you want to be a little bit crude. So in a lot of animals, they have something called a cecum. And this really absorbs a lot of fluids and salt. If your cecum's not working, you get thunder poops, diarrhea. Um, and in herbivores specifically, they have a very, very large cecum in order to break down cellulose. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in the next slide. In carnivores, because carnivores eat mostly meat, they either don't have a cecum or their cecum's not very big. So in this picture down here, we have the stomach, small intestine, and then if you see this like little loop thing, or actually big loop thing, that is the cecum in this digestive tract. We, as omnivores, so that means that we eat both plants and animals, we actually have a very little cecum. I'm going to show you guys a picture of it on one of the next slides. But first, we need to talk about what cellulose is. So, cellulose, think celery. So, if you take a bite of celery, there's all those stringy things. That's cellulose, those tough plant materials. This is what gets broken down in the cecum of herbivores. And it's really, really beneficial, especially for animals like deer. So, if we think about deer in Wisconsin in the winter, they eat like sticks and stuff. So those sticks, that wood, as we see here, it is actually made up of little cellulose fibers. So if you think about eating a stick, you're going to poop out a stick. But when deer eat a stick, they poop out their little tiny poop pellets. But that's because they have a cecum that helps to break down all of that stuff. We, like I said, as omnivores, don't have a very large cecum. And like this little meme says, that's why we can see corn in our poop. Tracer rounds, as my dad calls them, because the outside hull of corn kernels is made up of cellulose and we can't digest it very well. And that's why we can see those things exiting our body. So if we look at these digestive systems, comparing a carnivore above me, got the fox, and then other side, herbivore, the deer, we can see that this deer is a ruminant. So it has 4 chambers in its stomach, has the small intestine, and then it has this very large cecum that helps to break down a lot of that tough plant material. Okay. That's how it's able to get energy from those carbohydrates that are in that material. Here we have a carnivore. So we have our fox, we have the stomach, small intestine, and then its cecum compared to the rest of its digestive system is pretty small. It still has a little bit of a cecum, but not a very large one at all. So if we compare us, so this is our digestive system, to a rabbit. So a rabbit obviously is much more of an herbivore than we are. And if we follow that down, we as humans actually have a little tiny bit of a cecum, and this little dangly thing that's on the end of it is our appendix. And you can actually live without your appendix. There's a lot of people that get their appendix removed because it ruptures, but scientists think that that's because we don't necessarily eat like whole nuts. Like I'm talking like the hulls and sticks and bark like our ancestors might have consumed. So that's one of the hypotheses of why we have that appendix and why it's kind of tiny. And it's actually on our little tiny cecum that we have as omnivores. And this rabbit has a huge cecum because they eat grass and sticks and berries and all of that good stuff. So when we are also looking at the amount of energy that's passed from trophic level to trophic level, and trophic means eating level. So if we think about like what an animal eats out of, like if you go to a farm and you see a trough, when I think of trough, I think of like a bunch of pigs around, like a bunch of slop in a trough. That's where that word comes from. Trough and troph mean to eat in Latin. So if we look at all these things, down below, we have our producers. So those are our plants. Our primary consumers are going to be that next level up. Those are all going to be herbivores. Next, we have the secondary consumers. So these are carnivores and omnivores that are going to either eat these herbivores, so eat insects or anything like that. And at the top, we have tertiary consumers. So those are going to be typically strict carnivores. And as a rule, only about 10% of the energy gets passed on. This kind of harkens back to the activity that you did of energy that animals get from their food, where you figured out the math and how efficient the diets are. So only 10% of the energy that you eat goes into making your biomass that is then available for something else to eat and consume. So that's just a little kind of an explanation and a tie in of why we discussed that as well. So now what you guys are going to be doing is looking at some different data sets. So I have separate videos for all of the data sets that you are going to be looking at, and you are going to be looking at the diets of different animals that are at a zoo and how we can actually figure out by looking at their digestive system, looking at their dentition, so that's teeth, what these animals actually eat.